Today, I want to talk about the unrest in Sudan. The ongoing clash involves the Sudanese armed forces and the rival Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group. Can you discuss what happened to get us to this point where Sudan now sees itself really at the verge of a civil war?
Yes, unfortunately, what have been seeing in the last days has been a manifestation of failing to address the root causes of violence and instability in the history of Sudan, especially, really post-independence. The last years witnessed a lot of shifts. Starting from 2019, when the protest movement ousted Sudan's dictator Omar al-Bashir, but unfortunately, we ended up with a civilian military power sharing transition that did not hold much, as well failing to address key issues around security sector reform and around accountability and justice. We had then the coup in 2021, where protesters made clear that there should be no return to the power sharing model as they see it, as emboldening abusive leaders over and over again. We ended up with a political process that was facilitated by international actors, notably the United Nations, the US, the UK, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. Again, they decided to follow a path of political conveniency where these sticky issues weren't really addressed in a genuine manner. The two leaders ended up having a fight for power with Al Burhan, the army chief, demanding the integration of the rapid support forces. And the last days and weeks before the fighting started, we have been seeing growing of tense remarks between the two leaders, but also movement of equipments and weaponry and tanks in Khartoum and other places. There have been a lot of warning signs. Many people would say there has been writings on the wall. I would say most of the people did not expect the scale of harm and damage that we have been seeing in the last days.
I want to talk about that. You said that people have seen writing on the wall, and in a piece for The Guardian, you called the fighting that broke out in the capital, Khartoum, on April 15th unprecedented. But you also lay out a history of violence there. What makes this unprecedented? What makes this different than any other time?
I think one of the key issues, it's important to reflect that Sudan has a long history of violence, in particular in the peripheries. Unfortunately, that history has not been integrated into any national political project, and the violence continued to a degree in these peripheries, even in the last weeks and months before the fighting in Khartoum. The key difference is that it's the first time to see two military forces, two government forces, fighting each other to that length in terms of duration, but also the intensity of fighting within urban structures and within densely populated areas. So that is why it's unprecedented. But of course, it comes at the heel of cycles and cycles of abuses by the security forces.
Both of the generals, who I do want to talk about in a moment, agreed to a transition back to democracy after that 2021 coup. Was that an empty promise? Where did that transition go wrong?
I mean, the protesters made it very clear. Their distrust towards the generals was not coming from a vacuum. They came from simply they were al-Bashir's associate for a long time. They overseen his abusive campaigns against protesters and against civilians. So when the transition started in 2019, there were already a lot of signs that the generals were just pushing back a lot on the reforms demands. And then similarly, when the coup happened, that was a clear indicator they're not to be trusted to sustain the transition. The political process that followed clearly sidelined these key voices, who've been continuously saying people who commit abuses, who want to wield more power, cannot be trusted that to deliver justice on themselves. So it's really a lot of factual evidence was there in terms of why we cannot trust these military leaders. I think the key call now, we don't want to be in a situation of we told you so, but I think the key issue now for the international actors in particular is how to reflect on that and how to make it clear that this is a point of no return for these generals.
I do want to talk about the point of no return, but first, who are these generals? Can you give us more backstory here? They are SAF is led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the RSF is led by General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. Who are they? What can you tell us?
So for Burhan in particular, there's actually very little information on his background, given that he, kind of progressed through the SAF institution over the years. The latest position he held under al-Bashir was being the chief inspector of the army. He had a record of operating in Darfur. He was the liaison officer between the SAF and the RSF, in particular in the war in Yemen. So this is the connection he had with Hemeti going back in time to working in Darfur and working in the Yemen war. Hemeti had much, well-known history of him moving from being a warlord to leading a paramilitary militia to having his forces recognized independently to be functioning under President al-Bashir. After the revolution, his forces became independent, and he was the leader of these forces by himself. He had definitely much more documented record in Darfur in terms of the human rights abuses. We documented that back in 2015. We also documented the role of the RSF in cracking down on protesters in Khartoum in 2019, where over 120 protesters killed. So there is definitely a longer record of abuses that is much known for Hemeti and the RSF. But SAF has its also legacy. I mean, they were the main force fighting in Darfur, Kordofan, Blue Nile, and by al-Burhan being the de facto leader of Sudan, he legally and politically has been responsible of a lot of the abuses that took place after the coup.